Hello English language learners. Today we are going to learn 50 more advanced English words that will impress other people when you use them. Words that will be excellent when you're speaking, writing professionally, writing essays, anything at all. If you get these words into your vocabulary, it is going to raise your level of English. These words are taken from a research project that investigated the most advanced English words that are also commonly used. This is the final video in a series that I have produced, 100 words to impress. In the last few weeks, we have been looking at words 1 to 50. Today, we finish the series. We go all the way from word 51 all the way to word 100. So enjoy the video, study, repeat bits again and again so that you get these words into your speaking and into your everyday usage of English. Make sure you study hard because this is really going to help. Here we go. So the first word is afterwards, or sometimes without the S, afterward. This is an adverb and the stress is on af, afterwards. And this means something happens after another in time. So for example, we asked participants about their hobbies first and about their families afterwards. So afterwards is positioned after another thing, one after another. Syntactic. This is an adjective and the stress is on tac. Syntactic. And this means relating to the rules of language. So for example, there was a syntactic error in the essay. Deviation. This is a noun and the stress is on a, deviation. And this represents movement from normal or movement from the expected direction. So for example, the roadblock forced us into a deviation in our journey. It meant we couldn't go in the normal way. We had to go around, we had to take a different route. It was a deviation. Finite. This is an adjective and the stress is on fi, finite. This just means limited. For example, there is a finite amount of coal available for the world to use. So finite is often used with words for things that are going to run out or do not last forever. The word inject has many meanings. Here's the first one. This is a verb and the stress is on ject, inject. And in this meaning, inject means to put a liquid into the body for medical reasons. For example, we need to inject this drug into their arm to make them better. It's related to the word injection. So this is commonly used in a medical procedure. You have a needle and a syringe and it goes normally into the arm or something else and injects something in which has medicine in it. But inject can also mean to put new energy or life into something. For example, this business plan needs to be injected with fresh ideas. And here you take the idea of an injection and you imagine that you're putting it into something abstract, an idea. And you also take that medicine idea that the injection is going to make it better. So the idea here is that you do something that's going to improve something by putting something new into it, something that's going to boost it, give it more life. And we use inject in this way for a number of reasons. Morphological has one very well-known meaning, but it also has another meaning which is more specific. Morphological is an adjective and the stress is on lo. Morphological. And in the main meaning of morphological, we use the word to describe how words are put together in a language. For example, a morphological study found people from the north are more likely to use question tags in their speech. Question tags are those little endings to words when you say something but you've got a question about it. So, you're enjoying this lesson, aren't you? Aren't you is the question tag. And so a morphological thing is something to do with how the words are put together in the language. Now, the other meaning is how living things are structured. So this is to do with biology. So, for example, the green plants in the lake had unusual morphological features. So the word morphological is not just to do with language, it's really to do with structure, and we use it in language to look at the structure of words. So for example, does it have a prefix, a suffix? Where does the root come from? But we also use it for living things, plants, trees, animals. Morphological can describe all of those things. Pest. This is a noun and it can mean a creature or a person that is unwelcome. So mosquitoes are pests in this campsite. They bite people all night. Have you ever had an experience like that? Now, when we use pest to refer to people, this is a more informal use. So pest means really someone who is annoying you for some reason, and in the practice tasks we will use that form to practice. Replacement. This is a noun and the stress is on place. Replacement. And this means something new instead of the old version. So for example, this cup is cracked. We need a replacement. Basically, the cup doesn't work anymore. So we get a replacement that does the same thing. Replacement. Standardize. This is a verb and the stress is on stan. Standardize. And this is to make sure everything is similar so it can be compared. So for example, the fonts and images that the university use are standardized. Everything has the same logo. So lots of things can be standardized. And often when you're doing research, you want to standardize statistics. So you know that they are all measuring the same thing. And then you can compare them together to get proper results. So in a methodology section of a report or dissertation or thesis, we'll often use words such as standardize, standardization for this purpose. And finally, upward, or sometimes upwards. And this is an adverb with the stress on up, upward. And this means in a direction which is going up. The suffix would has that effect on a word. Up, would. So would tells us in the direction of the word before, which is up. So for example, she is an ambitious worker. She is always trying to go upward in the company hierarchy. So she's trying to get promoted, make progress in her business. She wants to go upward in her career. Let's recap words 51 to 60 then. So 51 was afterward, 52 syntactic, 53 deviation, 54 finite, 55 inject, 56 morphological, 57 pest, 58 replacement, 59 standardize, 60 upward. Algorithm. Have you heard of this word? Algorithm. This is a noun and the stress is on al. Algorithm. And this is a pattern that you follow to solve a problem. For example, the computer used an algorithm to work out the best solution. So it's a word commonly used with maths. We hear it a lot on the internet these days about how social media companies decide which posts or videos to show depending on an algorithm they use to decide which of your friends' posts will get to the top of your page. And they've got all kinds of complicated mathematical formulas. So algorithms are most commonly used on computers these days, but can be useful in mathematics. The word client has more than one meaning. It has a common meaning, and then it has another meaning related to computers. Let's look at the first meaning. So client is a noun, and the stress is on client. And the main meaning means a customer. So for example, the bank had a lot of clients who wanted to borrow money. Sometimes client means a little bit more than just a customer. A client suggests there's a special relationship, perhaps a long-term relationship, where as a customer you'll see a specific person in a company many times. There's a bit more to it, but client essentially means customer. But client can also mean a computer that can get information from another computer. This is a new word that has come about in recent times with the growth of computers. So sometimes data is not stored on your own computer, it's stored on another computer. And you need a special program on your computer to get that information. So for example, we use a desktop client to access all of our company emails. So this computer process of drawing information from another place, perhaps a server, is called a client. So that is another meaning of the word client. It means customer with a special kind of relationship, but it can also mean a computer that you can get information, a computer that gets information from another computer. The next word is diagnose. This is a verb and the stress is on nose. Diagnose. This means to identify a problem. For example, the doctor diagnosed a broken arm after looking at the X-rays. Diagnose is often used with medical situations, but it can be used with a range of problems too. Footnote. This is a noun with a stress on foot. Footnote. This means supporting information at the bottom of the page. Have you ever read a book where it has some notes at the bottom and it has maybe some numbers within the text, and those numbers match up to other numbers at the bottom? The numbers and words at the bottom of the page are called footnotes. So for an example sentence, if you want to know more about the definition of this word, look at the footnote. So perhaps in this example, you have a word in the text and a footnote tells you more about what it means. Footnote. Interact. This is a verb and the stress is on act. Interact. And this means to exchange information either by speaking or writing. So, for example, if we don't interact with our customers, we will never build a relationship with them. So interact is all about how we communicate. Motive. This is a noun and the stress is on motive. This means the reason for doing something. For example, the robber's motive was to get money to pay for their debts. So motive is about the reason why someone chooses to do something. They do something, it's often used in a criminal sense. If someone does something wrong and the police are investigating, one of the ways that they'll decide who has committed the crime is to look for their motives. Was there a reason why they wanted to do this crime? Motive. The word polar has 3 separate meanings. Polar is an adjective with the stress on polar. And the main meaning we know is areas of the world near the North or South Pole. So the Arctic Circle is a polar region and the Antarctic Circle is a polar region. So an example sentence might look like this. The wind was cold because it came from polar regions. So anything to do with the Arctic Circle or Antarctic Circle, North and South Pole, is described as polar. But there are some other uses of the word polar. The second one is related to the North and South Pole, but slightly different. We can use the word polar next to the word opposite to emphasize how different something is. So the boy and girl were polar opposites. They had nothing in common. And here we use the word polar to make it absolutely clear. They really are as opposite as they can be. And it's using the picture of the North Pole and the South Pole and that idea that these are the furthest 2 places apart on the planet. So a polar opposite is as far away from each other as can be. So that's the second meaning of polar. But there's also another meaning of polar, which is useful for people involved in electronics or interested in electronics, which means the flow of electricity between 2 points. The polar qualities of the electronic system are explained in the instruction manual. Might be an example sentence. So we have, in electricity, we have poles, and what happens between them is called polar. So 3 different uses of the word polar, not just for the North Pole and the South Pole, other meanings too. Replicate. This is a verb and the stress is on the word replicate. This means repeat in the same way as before. So, for example, the experiment was replicated to check if the same results would be recorded. Statistically. It's an adverb and the stress is on tis. Statistically. And this means in a way that relates to numbers or statistics. Statistics really is another way of describing numbers, or to be more accurate, statistics are things that can be counted. So, for example, the results of the research were statistically significant. So in this example, someone's done some research, they get some results, and they declare, these results are significant, they're important. Significant has its own separate meaning in research, to indicate that a level has been reached in the results that suggest the results can be considered valid. Statistically significant means It's because of the statistics that we have proof that it is significant. Okay, so statistically, a commonly used word in research. And velocity. This is a noun and the stress is on lo. Velocity. And this simply means the speed of something. The cars on the track reached their highest possible velocity. Now, which word do we use? Speed or velocity? Speed is the more common word, but if you're writing more professionally, scientifically, or in that kind of manner, velocity can be a good word to use. Let's recap words 61 to 70. 61 is algorithm, 62 is client, 63 diagnose, 64 is footnote, 65 interact, 66 is motive, 67 is polar, 68 replicate, 69 statistically, 70 velocity. Amongst. This is a preposition and the stress is on the word mongst. Amongst. And this means within something. So, for example, there was a 10-year-old child amongst the top performers in the exam. So we have all the top performers, and amongst those top performers there was this one 11-year-old child. So really we're talking about one group within another, or one individual within another. It's someone or something within something bigger. Coherent. This is an adjective and the stress is on here. Coherent. And this means clearly organised, easy to follow. For example, it was a very coherent dissertation. We knew exactly how each point was connected to the others. And coherent is used a lot when we're discussing language. If something is coherent, then the language works. It's clear. It goes from one thing to another well. It flows well. We understand what's come before. We have an indication of what's coming next. Everything is connected together really well. The opposite is incoherent. But we can use coherent for more than just writing. It can be ideas, processes, anything at all where there's a pattern. And if it's a coherent pattern, then it's clearly organised and easy to follow. Dilemma. This is a noun and the stress is on le. Dilemma. And this is a confusing problem where a decision is needed. So, for example, I have a real dilemma deciding whether to spend the holidays with my family or with my friends. What do you decide? So it's a problem that needs a decision, and often you'll spend a long time worrying or considering it before you make that decision. The words find and found have several meanings, and some of them you may not be well aware of. So find or found, it's a verb. And the meaning you probably know best is discovered. So for example, I have found the pen I was looking for. Hooray! So find or found means discovered. But there are other meanings too. Find or found is often used to describe a final decision based upon evidence. So, for example, the criminal was found to be guilty by the judge. And that's the context this word is often used in, is when a judge is making a decision. And when they pass their decision and they say what they're going to do, whether they're going to set them free or punish them, then they will say, I find this person, or I have found this person innocent or guilty. So it's got a similar sense to discover, but very specifically in relation to a final decision that's made based upon the evidence. But do you know the third meaning? The third meaning is to start an organisation. For example, the company was founded 10 years ago. This is a common word used to talk about the date or the year or the time when something official began, when something was founded. And this is a use maybe you weren't quite so well aware of before. So find and found, 3 important uses. They're all used a lot, but not just to do with discovered. Irrigation. This is generally a noun, but I've mentioned adjective because it's often used as one. It's often used as a word before to describe another noun. The stress is on gay, irrigation. And it's the process of getting water to the right place, often in farming. So 2 examples here. The new irrigation system brought many benefits to the farm. Or, if we want to save water, we should create better irrigation. So, irrigation. Mutation. This is a noun. The stress is on te. Mutation. And this describes a change, usually without an external cause, or not one that we can obviously see. So, for example, the coronavirus has gone through several mutations since it began. So it started as one virus, then there was a mutation, and it changed to a slightly different virus, slightly different effects, then it changed again, and it's something that we're all familiar with around the world. But this is a mutation. So something changed. Did anyone make the change happen? Not really. It just happened on its own. Mutation. Politically. This is an adverb describing something for a political reason. So, for example, the engaging speech changed people's minds politically. So because it's an adverb, it simply relates everything before it to politically. So in the sentence here, we're told this is a political outcome. Respiratory. Respiratory is an adjective, and the stress is on pe. Respiratory. And this is to do with breathing, often used to describe problems with breathing. So an example sentence here, in the winter, I suffer from respiratory problems. I get colds all the time. Stimulus. This is a noun. Sti is the stress. Stimulus. This means to encourage activity. An example, the excellent teacher gave students a stimulus to study harder in their spare time. So they did something that encouraged it to happen. Now, stimulus is used in a number of contexts. It's often used in a financial context. So if governments want to improve their economy, they will do something which is a stimulus. Perhaps they'll put more money into the economy as a stimulus to encourage more activity, to encourage something to happen. But it can be used in medicine, science, a number of contexts. Stimulus. Viable has more than one meaning. It's an adjective, and the stress is on vi, viable. The main meaning we know is able to succeed. So, for example, they realised the plan for a new tunnel was not viable when they couldn't drill through the rock. So they realised it could not succeed. They'd start it, it wouldn't finish, so it wasn't viable. Sometimes we say something is not viable because there's not enough money to pay for it. Sometimes we don't have the materials, so it's not viable. So the reason why something can't succeed affects whether something is viable or not. But there's another similar meaning, which means able to survive. For example, the baby was born early, but she was viable and left the hospital after 3 days. So viable here means able to survive. The baby was able to survive. It had been born early, but still able to survive. So we use it with babies, we use it with animals, we use it with any living creature. If something is viable, it's able to survive. And we normally use the word viable in situations where there is some doubt about whether something can survive. So for example, I'm a healthy adult, so I wouldn't normally go to someone and say, yes, I'm viable, I'm able to survive. I wouldn't use it for myself. I would use it in situations where there is some doubt about whether someone or something can survive. So viable, able to succeed, able to survive. Let's recap words 71 to 80. So 71 amongst, 72 coherent, or coherent, I should say. 73 dilemma, 74 found, 75 irrigation, 76 mutation, 77 politically, 78 respiratory, 79 stimulus, 80 viable. Antibody. This is a noun with a stress on an, antibody, and it's something in the blood that fights bacteria. So for example, after a few days, the antibodies destroyed the infection and the patient got better. The word compensate can be interpreted in two different ways. The first main use of compensate is on this page here. It's a verb with the stress on compensate. And the meaning, number one, is give money to make up for a problem. Look at the example. The show was cancelled, so they compensated people for the cost of their tickets. So compensation here is to do with money that you get back. And this covers all range of ways that the company will give money back to you if something's gone wrong. So if you're sold a product and something goes wrong with it, a company might give you compensation for loss of use of the product. They may also give you compensation for the time taken out for you to go and visit them and chase up the problem with the product. Any reason at all why a company has let you down might mean that they give you money back to make up for your difficulty, and that's all called compensation, and the verb is compensate. The second use comes from that idea of giving something back, but takes it a bit further. This second use is something that hides or replaces a gap in something else. Let me use an example to explain it. The students' excellent understanding compensated for their language errors, and they got the top mark. So here we have a problem, language errors, and that dragged it down, but their understanding was so good that it actually brought the level of their work up. So the errors brought it down, their understanding brought it up, and in the end it got the mark it deserved because the understanding compensated for the language errors. There was a lack, but something else came in that helped to replace that lack or that gap, and that's compensate. So those are two meanings of the word compensate, closely related, slightly different in use. Discourse. This is a noun and the stress is on the word discourse. And this is any conversational communication through speech or text. So, for example, the discourse became rude, so the parents took their children away. So really the speech or the text was rude, so the parents did that. And discourse is a word often used when analysing speech or language at an academic or scientific level, often used in research describing the acts of speech or text. The word fringe has two meanings. Meaning one, the front part of someone's hair. Please cut my fringe short. It's very untidy. You probably agree with that. I think I know. But the fringe is the part of my hair here. And it's a noun because it's a real thing. So it's a part of the hair in this front position. But fringe also means something else. Fringe can mean at the edge. Look at this example. I'm always on the fringes at the social club. I never get to speak to the important people. So here fringe means I'm on the edge. I'm not on the inside. I'm more on the outside. And it's often used to people who are a part of something but slightly disconnected. Or they're in something but they're not really central. At the fringe of something. Have you ever felt at the fringe of something? This would be the word for you to use. You're at the edge. So fringe can mean hair or at the edge. The word leisure has a number of uses, but they're all connected to each other. The first one is the enjoyment of hobbies and activities. It's a noun with the stress on leisure. And look at the example. I have more time for leisure now that the school year has finished. So let's imagine the situation. The school year has finished and the student is at home all day. There's no one telling them what they have to do unless their parents work them really hard. So they have time to do what they want. And generally the things we do in the time that is ours, the hobbies, activities, we would call leisure. And sometimes when we talk about the time we have to do those things, we'll call it leisure time. Leisure can also be used kind of like an adjective to describe another noun, though, when it comes to speaking about sports and activities. We can call a place where sports and activities happen a leisure centre. So the local leisure centre has swimming and tennis clubs. So it takes on that meaning of free time, enjoyment a little bit further and makes it more specific to something active, something to do with sport. Leisure for enjoyment, but also in a sport way. And thirdly, leisure can be used in a phrase starting with at your leisure. And this means available. For example, ask for any help you wish. I am at your leisure. I'm available for you. So sometimes it just means available. It's sort of linked to the idea that you've got free time, you're enjoying yourself, you haven't got any restrictions on you. But here it's slightly different. It means I'm available for you. I'm at your leisure. So if you follow my videos on YouTube, I am available for you. I'm at your leisure. I'm providing things for you. I'm making myself available for you. At your leisure. Namely. This is an adverb with a stress on name. And this means to be specific. For example, the local leisure centre has many facilities, namely a swimming pool and tennis courts. So you're starting off with a general idea and then you want to make it more specific. So namely is a good adverb to use to introduce the next part where you are giving more specific examples of what comes before or just clarifying what comes before. Namely, really good word to use. Pre. This is a prefix, so it's a little word that goes before another word. And here it means before in the sense of before this word happens. So in the example, are you taking a pre-sessional course to improve your English? So sessional comes from session. So perhaps your main course will be your session. And pre means before that session. So it's a course before your course, pre-sessional. But pre can go before a number of words. Prevent means to stop something before it happens. A preview means to view it before other people do. So pre, a very useful prefix. The word ruler has two meanings that are completely different. It's a noun in both senses, and the first one is the one we're more familiar with, the controller of a country or a region. So, for example, the ruler of the area forced everyone to pay 50% in taxes. Imagine that. So ruler is someone who's got complete control, like a king or a queen, dictator. We don't often use it with a president or prime minister who's elected. Ruler's like a strong word, someone who has great authority and great power. The other meaning is completely different. It's a rectangular object for measuring things. So if you remember when you were at school, you had this little long rectangular stick, lots of marks on it for centimetres, millimetres, or if you're in America or England, inches. And it's used for measuring things. And we call that a ruler too. It's a rectangular object for measuring things. So for example, do you want to know how long the line is? Use a ruler to find out. So ruler is a king and ruler is for measuring. Symbolic. This is an adjective with the stress on bo. Symbolic. And this demonstrates something else, usually something greater. Look at the example. The angry speech was symbolic of how most people in the village felt about the situation. So here, the speech was a small thing from one person, but actually everyone, all the people, far more people, were also angry. So the speech was symbolic. It demonstrated something that was much larger than itself. It was symbolic of all the people's feelings. Volition. This is a noun. The stress is on li. Volition. And this means someone's free will. So, for example, you don't have to force me to go. I will go of my own volition, my own free will. It will be my decision. That's what volition refers to. And let's recap words 81 to 90. 81 is antibody. 82, compensate. 83, discourse. 84, fringe. 85, leisure. 86, namely. 87, pre. 88, ruler. 89, symbolic. 90, volition. Complication or complications. This is a noun with the stress on K. Complication. And this means a difficulty or extra problems. So, for example, the project ran into complications and they finished a week later than planned. So complications here really means difficulties. We often use this word specifically in a medical situation. There were complications with the operation, and then another problem arose. So often when we have one problem and then we're trying to solve that problem, but while we're trying to solve that problem, another problem arises, that is often referred to as complications, and particularly in a medical hospital sense. Dissection. This is a noun and the stress is on sec. Dissection. And this means cutting something, usually to get to something more important. So, for example, the surgeon made a dissection so that they could operate on the heart. They cut through. Ooh. So they could get into somewhere else. A dissection. Globalization, sometimes spelled with an S, that's typical of British English, or with a Z, that's typical of American English. I'm going to use the British English spelling for the rest of this lesson. This is a noun with the stress on Z, globalization. And this simply describes the process of things becoming global. It's often referred to as a topic, a subject area referring to everything to do with how things now happen at a global level. We don't just live in our own little towns and villages. For example, I'm speaking to you through the internet anywhere in the world. That's because of globalization. Globalization is the process of things becoming global. So here's the example. Globalization has led to the same products being manufactured in a number of countries. Lever. It's a noun with a stress on li. This is a device that makes something move. So if you have something that you turn to make something move, that's a lever. Example, they needed a lever to lift the heavy box off the ground. Perhaps you've seen cars in a garage where they use a lever to get the car to go up into the air. A lever. The word neat has several meanings, and some of them are quite new into the English language. It's an adjective, and the main meaning is tidy. For example, her writing was very neat and easy to read. Have you ever seen that? You've read someone's writing, and I don't mean typing on a computer, I mean with a pen writing. And then they give it to you. It's very easy to read. It's all in a nice pattern. It's neat. It's tidy. But we can use that for other things. If someone's room is in good condition, we could say that that's neat. And we could call someone a neat person because they are tidy. The other definitions are similar, but move this on a little bit. So the second definition is done with skill. So, for example, it was a very neat dance routine. So imagine some dancers, they don't make any mistakes, they do some things really well. It's called neat. So, again, we have this idea of it being tidy because nothing went wrong, everything was as planned. But here neat is referring more to the fact they did it skillfully. Now, the final use is a use that's come in informally into very general everyday English. So the previous two examples are the examples you could use in academic, business, professional situations. But this one's not. This is informal, but it's good for you to know so that you don't get confused if you hear it. And this one just simply means really good. In that was neat, that's neat. So here neat is really replacing the words really good. Well done, that was neat. Often used by young people, particularly in America, but it's spreading around the world. So neat, tidy, represents skill, but also, informally, really good. The word precipitate has got two meanings. It's a verb, and the stress is on si. And the main meaning is to make something happen. People stopped buying their products, and that precipitated a change in the design. So one thing here leads to something else happening, but there's like a process that forces it along. Precipitate. We often use this with weather. When rain comes out of the sky, we have clouds in the sky and they precipitate. Rain comes out of it. The clouds lead to something else happening, the rain coming down. The second meaning of precipitate is unconnected. And this time it's a noun. And this means something that separates from a liquid and becomes solid. Have you ever seen that? You have a liquid and then suddenly over time things become solid within it, often in scientific experiments. So for example, the precipitate of the liquid solution looks like crystals. So two meanings of the word precipitate. One, to make things happen. The other one, something that separates from a liquid and becomes solid. Scenario. This is a noun with the stress on na. Scenario. And this means a situation or outline of a situation. In one scenario, it is predicted that water levels would rise quickly. In the other scenario, water levels don't rise. So scenario is situation, imagining how something is going to be in a particular moment, in a particular place. This kind of captures the general context of what's happening in this place. We often use it with filmmaking. So a scenario is like the story that's going on in that time in the film. The word systematic has two meanings which are loosely connected but different enough that we need to teach you them in separate ways. So systematic is an adjective and the stress is on ma, systematic. And the first meaning is following a method. For example, a systematic approach was taken by the research, which was step by step. And step by step really captures the meaning of that. Something systematic has a process it goes through carefully. Steps are followed. It's very well laid out. It's methodologically a good pattern. Systematic. Everything is in good working order as far as the process. So really good word to use if you want to describe a process that is clear and organized. But systematic can also be used when describing typical behavior of a group, and often in a negative way. Systematic. Another word you might hear connected to this is systemic, which is similar. Let's look at systematic in an example. There was a systematic failure in the police to follow up on small crimes. And this means they did the same thing over and over and over again. So again, we have this principle of process, but it's a process of the same thing being repeated, a systematic. Often used negatively. They did this wrong. It was systematically wrong. Artwork. We're probably familiar with the word art, but we also have artwork. The stress is on art, artwork. And this is a noun for pieces of art. When do we use it? Well, usually combined with a reference to the artist. When the artist is around, they speak. They don't just talk about their own art, they talk about their own artwork. So that's when we usually use this. So for example, let's imagine you're speaking to an artist, you ask them, where can I see your work? And they say, you can view my artwork in a local exhibition. And here is word 100. And this word is yeast. And this is a noun, and it's a substance that makes bread rise. For example, add yeast to the dough and then put it in the oven. What's this doing in an academic text? I hear you ask. Well, yeast, although it refers to the rising, something that makes bread rise and also goes into beer, yeast embodies that idea of something rising. So if you put something into something and it makes it rise, you can call that a yeast in any situation. And so we might come across that in economics, sociology, in any situation. If you talk about a yeast, you're talking about something that makes something else increase. It's a really good word to use if you're trying to get that meaning across. So yeast, it's got a basic meaning to do with food and drink, but you can use it as like a, although it's a noun, it kind of has this adjective quality that it's describing something else that rises. Really clever word to use. Let's go through words 91 to 100 again. Complication, dissection, globalization, lever, neat, precipitate, scenario, systematic, artwork, yeast,